Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of Learning the Fundamentals. My name is Shepard Merritt. This is an SFR Plus podcast about my journey through the Christian faith as well as my involvement in the independent fundamental Baptist movement. Last episode I talked about 10 things that I like about the new IFB, and I'm going to take a little bit of a turn this episode and talk about 10 red flags that I noticed throughout my 3 or 4 years of being involved in the movement. Throughout that time, I attended multiple different churches. I went to a few what they call soul-winning marathons where, a lot of people that listen to the preaching get together in person and go out and preach the gospel together. And, I was pretty active online listening to sermons, and, I'd follow multiple new IFB pastors on social media, and I think I got a good understanding of the community. And so today I want to talk about 10 red flags that I noticed throughout the preaching and the community and some things within myself. And so let's just jump right into it. The first red flag that I noticed is how quickly I became King James only. And of course, that's not necessarily a red flag for the new IFB as much as it is just for myself. So it never really sat right with me as I look back on the day I became King James only, and it didn't take me very long at all. I definitely didn't do thorough research to fully understand the position before I attached that label to myself. I sort of just was drawn to the emotional appeal of it and kind of went all in immediately, almost. I think I heard the arguments one day, and the next day I was labeling myself as KJV only. And it never really sat right with me how quickly I became King James only. It took a second, it took a while for me to really understand that and realize that that was maybe a problem. But it wasn't until later down the road that I noticed that retrospectively. Of course, as Christians, we want to be slow to change our mind about things. We want to be open to discovering new things. We want to be open to being corrected about things, of course. But I think we ought to be slow to change our mind, especially about doctrine. We need to be really careful and study the scriptures and thoroughly research anything that comes our way because we just want to reverence the truth. I think I just got so drawn to the emotional appeal of it because I had never really seen anybody so passionate about what they believe. And I've never really seen that kind of zeal, especially growing up in the South. There's a lot of churches and Christians that just kind of don't really take it serious. And so it just felt good to see somebody that cared about what they believed and see, a movement so passionate about what they stand for. And so I think that sort of drew me in, and I kind of just, maybe got carried away a little bit and got overly zealous and had some misguided zeal there before thoroughly researching that position. But that was the first red flag, just how quickly I adapted that position and became King James only. The second red flag, and it may sound a little bit contradictory, but is how my immediate first reaction to the preaching of the new IFB was negative. And I know that may sound a little bit contradictory because I just said that I was so immediately King James only. But I'm not talking about being King James only. I'm talking about the preaching and the doctrines that the new IFB teaches. I mentioned in my last episode, my first reaction to Steven Anderson and my first encounter with his preaching, and it was negative. It always alarmed me that when I was first introduced to the doctrines that I held to, I had a negative reaction. And so I was so zealous and passionate about the teachings of the new IFB once I was involved in the movement, but just it was in the back of my mind a lot of times that it didn't really sit right with me that I had to acquire a taste for that sort of preaching. And it even made me hesitant to recommend the preaching to other people. even though I was really passionately defending the doctrines that they were teaching, I was hesitant and reluctant to recommend those preachers to other people because I remember how I felt when I first heard them. How I thought, this is just outlandish. I've never seen somebody this extreme, and so I didn't want to come across that way to other people. So I always felt like whenever I recommended the preaching of Steven Anderson or any other new IFB pastor, that I always had to give a disclaimer and say, like, well, you just got to look past this and that and look past the most popular videos that pop up because everybody wants to paint them in a negative light, but just really get into the meat of it and you'll see the truth, which I do believe that if you just look up Steven Anderson's name on the internet, it's going to portray the most negative aspects about him. It definitely won't show you all of the hard work he's put into researching for his sermons and the reading that he's done and the good that he's done, all the times he's gone out and preached the gospel to people. There's so much good that has been done there that doesn't get advertised. The only thing that you'll see is just the viral clips of him kicking people out of church and stuff like that, which of course is not a good is not a good thing. The Bible says that a bishop must be blameless, and to have such a negative reputation online, I think speaks a little bit to the type of preacher that he is. And but anyways, that never really sat right with me, that the first reaction that I had to the preaching was negative, yet I fully adapted the doctrine and started defending it. And like I said, it just made me not want to really recommend the preaching to other people. So I don't know. It kind of felt like it trapped me in a box or an echo chamber, as you would call it. But I just kind of disregarded that, though, as me being so influenced by the world that when I actually heard biblical preaching, I had to become accustomed to it because I'm just so influenced by this world that it didn't sit right with me. So I guess I was like making excuses for it. But I think in reality, it was kind of just the Holy Spirit tugging on my heart, letting me know that there's something not right about this. But anyways, the third red flag that I want to talk about is my disregard for respected people that were close to me or well-renowned preachers. So the nature and the demeanor of the new IFB led me almost manipulatively to believe that they were the only source of truth and that anybody who disagreed with them was wrong. It's just like the way that they spoke and the way that they would teach, I just felt like whenever somebody disagreed with them, whether it was somebody that I knew in person and respected or somebody online, like a really well-respected pastor online or preacher, I always felt like if they said something that didn't align with the new IFB, that they were wrong. And I was just so hesitant whenever I heard any sort of preaching that, I always felt like maybe I could, and this is probably another red flag within myself, but I felt like I wasn't able to form an opinion on the subject being talked about by other preachers unless I had first heard a sermon about that from the new IFB so that I could form my opinion on it. It's kind of like whenever you listen to music critics and a band releases an album and you feel like you're not allowed to form an opinion on that album until you hear your favorite music critic form their opinion. It's kind of like a similar situation there, I guess. And of course I don't, consciously think that. It's just something that I look back on and realize that, I did. I would not really be able to formulate my own opinions on things unless I had first heard a sermon talking about those things. And, of course, that's something as I grew in my faith, I got better at that, and I started to disagree with the preaching of the new IFB in certain areas. As I read my Bible, for myself, I started to grow in the Spirit and formulate my own opinions on things. But definitely early on, I was just riding the back of the new IFB preachers, and whatever they believed, I believed wholeheartedly and would stick my neck out for, even if I didn't really understand the position. And even when people would reason with me and show me good evidence against things like King James onlyism or something, I would reject those things, not knowing how or not understanding the argumentation. I would reject their arguments and then go watch videos defending my position, saying like how, not necessarily how to defend King James only, but I would try to find examples of where, for example, Steven Anderson was answering an objection to the King James only position. And so I would try to find all these arguments online that I could use. And I really did think that I was just defending the truth. It's not like I was just, I don't know. I really did think that I was just defending the truth, and that I was just doing my research. But in reality, I was just like trying so hard to remain new IFB whenever people brought me really good evidence against it. And so I guess it took me a long time to realize that all of the videos that I watched and all the sermons I listened to and stuff like that was more so me really trying to remain a new IFB throughout all the negative or the opposing viewpoints and argumentation that I was exposed to. I was listening to debates, I was watching videos and all these sort of things, and I was reading books and all this stuff. And I was trying really hard to stay King James only, and I was trying really hard to stay new IFB because I really loved being involved in that because it felt so good. It felt like I was just standing for the truth. It felt like I was really a part of something good. But slowly, as I was introduced and more open to the opposing viewpoint, I just slowly began to realize that, wait a second, I'm watching these videos and I'm agreeing more with the people who don't support my viewpoint. And I'm trying and grasping at straws to find good argumentation from people who represent my beliefs, and I just can't. It's just their arguments don't stand up, against criticism. And as far as like my disregard for family and people close to me who were advising me against the movement, it seemed like everybody in the movement of the new IFB had some sort of testimony or some sort of story about how their family didn't like the things that they believe, and so they had to make some enemies along the way, and they're being persecuted for the cause of Christ. And so that's kind of what I tried to adapt. I was like, well, maybe that's what's going on with me. I'm standing up for the truth, and I'm getting backlash from people close to me. And so I guess the common denominator here is I never thought that the new IFB was the problem. I attached myself to the movement, and everything negative that came from that, I put on other things. I put on other people. I would put it on, I'm just being persecuted for the cause of Christ and all this sort of thing. So I guess that's red flag number 3, is my disregard for well-respected people, whether it's family or preachers online. It always felt like every well-known preacher online had a sermon against them from the new IFB. It's just, I don't know. I think that's a red flag that I slowly began to realize over time. The fourth red flag, I guess, sort of goes hand in hand with the third, but the fourth red flag I've labeled no questioning. I remember I felt like I wasn't allowed to question certain doctrines because if I disagreed, then I may be not welcome in the movement anymore. Seeing the popular videos online of Steven Anderson kicking people out of his church really made me afraid to disagree on any sort of doctrine. And even around people that are not as extreme as Steven Anderson, but still involve themselves in the movement, I would feel like I couldn't even express I couldn't even question the doctrines that he believed, because I felt like I was afraid that I wouldn't be welcome in the movement anymore. And I felt like I had to defend everything that he did or said. And it's like if he said something, I had to first believe that it was true, and then second, research it to figure out why or how to defend it, which of course is just super backwards. And again, I didn't consciously think that in the time. Just looking back now, I can see that that's the way that I operated, which is just really good indication that that's just cultish behavior. To think that you're standing for the truth, but only to be defending the person you're following regardless of what they say. And of course, as I mentioned, as I grew in my faith, that wasn't the case. I began to disagree with Steven Anderson and a lot of the preachers of the new IFB on many different issues, but definitely early on, it was like, he said it, it's true, and how do I defend that? And the reason that I felt that way, like I said last episode, is because he had established credibility in my mind already. I learned so many things through the new IFB. I learned a clear presentation of the gospel. I learned justification by faith. I learned eternal security. I learned how to realize New Testament truths through the Old Testament. I didn't even, before I got involved in the new IFB, I didn't even know the significance of the Old Testament. And so just seeing something like that, just becoming open to the fact that the Old Testament prophesies of Jesus, that's just a fundamental, foundational truth that that every believer should understand. And I learned that through the new IFB. So after making just monumental realizations like that, this movement and this pastor, Steven Anderson, had just developed so much credibility in my mind that the other things that they were saying, I thought were just as true, such as the reprobate doctrine or just their demeanor in general, how aggressive and extreme they were. So I felt like I wasn't allowed to question it because I didn't know enough to question it. But as I began to read my Bible more and grow in my knowledge of the Word, then I began to really kind of determine what was right and what was wrong, and take the good and spit out the bones, I guess you would say. So that's red flag number 4, is no questioning. The 5th red flag I've labeled personality mimicking. And this is more so just a general red flag. Obviously, this is not applicable to everybody in the new IFB or everybody who goes to church at a new IFB church. But this is just something that I noticed was pretty consistent. Whenever we would go visit the churches or whenever we would go have a soul-winning marathon, there were so many people in the movement who just seemed like they were trying really hard to mimic Steven Anderson. It's like they were trying to speak like him and have a similar haircut to him. And I even sometimes felt myself talking in a similar tone of voice as he did. And I think it's, maybe just because I listened to him for so long that it's like I learned to speak in the same cadence of my voice. But sometimes when I was presented the opportunity, I felt like I needed to say some of the new IFB catchphrases. I feel like there's catchphrases that are repeated throughout everybody in the movement. For example, if you go to one of these events, it's very likely that you'll hear the phrase, oh, that person's going to split hell wide open. They'll be talking about a false teacher or something, and they'll say, oh, they're just going to split hell wide open. And that's just a common thing to hear. And it's just, it always was weird to me that everybody just kind of repeated similar catchphrases. Another thing is just labeling people or referring to homosexuals as reprobates. Of course, that's a belief of the new IFB that every single homosexual has been twice dead, plucked up by the roots by God, and is too far gone, essentially. And so I felt like I needed to refer to homosexuals as reprobates as often as I could. And I don't know why, I guess just to fit in. But yeah, it's just a lot of people in the movement even other pastors in the new IFB just seem to mimic Steven Anderson. And I just thought that was so strange. Even though, like, it took me a minute to sometimes realize that I was doing it. And so I don't think it's intentional. I guess what it is, it's the thing that's so attractive about the movement isn't necessarily the heart of what they believe. It's more so just the wow factor and the shock factor. The presentation of Steven Anderson, you kind of either love it or hate it, or you grow to love it, in my case. And then it's like you want to have that effect on other people. Not necessarily the extreme negative reaction, but like the people who mimic his personality are not doing it intentionally. I think it's just they want to recreate a similar presentation to the preacher that they listen to, because he's had an influence on their life and they want to have a similar influence on somebody else's life, I guess is what it boils down to. So that was the first 5 red flags, and since this episode is starting to get a little bit lengthy, I'm going to go ahead and cut it short, and we'll pick back up next episode for part 2. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.